Hello, Saplings. Welcome to my home again. Thanks for joining me. We are going to talk about the circle of grace still this week. So last week we talked about what a circle of grace is, what belongs inside of it, what doesn't belong in it. You might have used this sheet here and wrote some things that do belong in your circle of grace inside, and what doesn't belong maybe you wrote outside of your circle. We remember that this is us in our circle, and God is with us in our circle of grace. So today we're going to talk a little bit about boundaries. What is a boundary? What kind of boundaries there are? Why they can be helpful. So what is a boundary? Well, boundaries are like limits or borders that we need to protect ourselves, to keep us safe within our circle of grace. So if we think about our circle of grace, our own, where is a boundary? Where is the boundary? Well, it is this yellow circle. That is our boundary. That is our circle of grace. We can't really see that boundary, but we know that's there because we get to decide who gets to come into our circle within the boundary and who we don't want outside of our boundary, keeping them out. So boundaries are things that keep us safe. So I'm going to talk a little bit about different kinds of boundaries. So I put boundaries into different categories. The first is physical. So there are physical boundaries. These are like actual things, right? Like something that blocks us from moving. So think about a fence, right? We can't just walk through a fence. That's a boundary. Keeps our home safe or our yard safe. Or a door, right? A door is a boundary that it can be shut or locked, and that can keep us safe. Our clothes. Clothes are a physical boundary that protects us, that keeps our the parts of our body that we don't want to show to everybody. It covers those. Buildings, right? Like at a school, your school might have an alarm. They might have a lock on the door. We have some of those same things at our homes. We have locks. We have a roof over our heads. These are all boundaries that keeps us safe from the weather. When we're in the car, we have a seatbelt. That's a boundary that keeps us from moving forward, right? In a car accident. So those are all physical boundaries. Those are like actual things that we can touch or see or feel that keep us safe. Well, there's a second category of boundaries I'm going to talk to you about, which are symbolic boundaries. So a symbolic boundary is a limit or a border that you can see it, but it doesn't actually physically restrict you or keep you from something. Like a fence would keep you can't walk through it. So a symbolic boundary is like a sign. You can choose to respect that, or you could ignore the limit. So for example, I was walking yesterday through the woods, and there was a sign up that said, "Do not go on this trail because it's not safe." It was near the water, and they said it might cave in. And that I chose to go on the trail anyways. I did not listen to the boundary, and I went on the trail. And I was okay. I didn't fall in. I didn't get really close to the water. Nothing caved in. But that was a symbolic boundary that I chose to ignore and not listen to. So you can either, a symbolic boundary, you can either listen to or not. So things like signs, things like a no trespassing sign, don't come in here, right? Things like the lines on like a baseball field or a football field or a basketball court. We have these lines and they show us where we are supposed to play in. But we can step over them if we want. Or like a crosswalk when you're crossing the road. And to get safely to the other side, there are borders, boundaries, right? Painted along the road where it says to cross. And that's to keep us safe to stay within them, but we could choose to maybe not go in them or not because they are symbolic, right? Or like a movie rating. If something is rated PG-13, that's a symbolic boundary. It means if you're not 13, you probably shouldn't watch it. So these are all sort of symbolic boundaries. And there is one more kind of boundary that I want to talk to you about, and those are internal boundaries. So these kind of boundaries are not anything that you can touch or see, but they are things that are kind of inside your head. They're understandings of rules or limits that we carry around in our mind. So most internal boundaries we learn, we're either taught them or we learn them through experience. And so think about the rule of not playing in the street. So I'm sure when you were little or your parents taught you, you can't go out in the street, and when you cross the street, look both ways for cars, right? Those are boundaries. Those are internal boundaries that we know now when we go into the street, we automatically look both ways, right, before we cross. Or we don't go right out in the middle of the road and play, because this is an internal boundary that we have learned that keeps us safe. So some other internal boundaries would be, well, our circle of grace is an internal boundary, right? We're learning about it right now. You've maybe learned about it in the past. It's this space all around you. We can't see it or feel it, but we know it's there because we have learned about it. We can feel God with us in this space, in this boundary that we've created. Some other internal boundaries are things like feeling full in your belly, right? When you've eaten enough, you start to feel kind of full and you think, oh, that's a line. I need to stop and not eat anymore or I'll be sick. That's an internal boundary. It keeps us from not getting sick. Knowing how to behave, right, at school or at church. We've been told ways to be respectful of each other and the place, and so those can be internal boundaries that keep us all safe in the right space. Thinking about things like, how close do you stand to someone? It's kind of funny, but in our culture, we don't stand like this close, right? And even right now, how far apart are we supposed to stand? Yeah, 6 feet, right? We're supposed to be 6 feet apart. That is an internal boundary that we have been told, right, by our lawmakers and our doctors that we should all be 6 feet apart, and that keeps us safe from the virus. So that's an internal boundary. So internal boundaries are things that we know in our head and that can keep us safe in those ways. So we've talked about the 3 different kinds of boundaries. We have physical, symbolic, and internal boundaries, right? So if a person ignores somebody's boundaries, right, then that person whose boundaries are being violated can get hurt, right? They could be hurt physically or they could be hurt emotionally. And sometimes, we're with someone, maybe a friend or an adult, and they're giving us all these good signs that we can trust them, but maybe we still kind of feel like uncomfortable. We have this kind of funny feeling in our belly or sometimes in our chest, like my chest will get tight or my shoulders will get tight, and I just feel kind of funny around them, like I'm not really sure about them. Like something might be wrong. So we need to pay attention to those feelings because the Holy Spirit can work through our feelings. It could be a signal from the Holy Spirit. So if you feel something like that around somebody or in a situation, you can go and find a trusted adult and tell them what's going on. A parent or a teacher. Or if you can't do it then, do it later. And so speaking of that, right now you can stop this video. We've come to the end, and you can do an activity with your trusted adult that will help you keep thinking about boundaries and your circle of grace. And I will see you next week.